Hi everyone, welcome to Block Talk. Today I'm going to be playing some Minecraft while reading you some stories to fall asleep to, so relax and enjoy. Story 1. Neighbor self-owns by calling code enforcement on himself. We bought our house 4 years ago. During the showing, inspections, appraisal, and approval by the city, no one said anything about the neighbor's fence that spanned from the front right corner of his house, if looking at them from the street, across his driveway with a gate, to the front left corner of my house. This effectively blocked me from accessing a 30-foot by 4-foot strip of my own property. It was all grass that he mowed. Later that year in November, I noticed a tiny bit of water seeping into the basement on that side of the house. We had just gotten through our third historic once-in-100 years rainfall of the year. A quick ocular pat down of that side of the house showed a slight slope towards my house. I planned to hire someone in the spring to slope it away and install a French drain so I didn't flood his driveway like a good neighbor. The next spring I hired the crew. They went over and started working. The neighbor, a 60-ish-year-old who looks 80 according to my wife, came out all hot screaming at these guys, wondering what they were doing on his property. Mind you, I had never had issue with a siding repair who accessed that same side, or the cable guy, or a plumber who all accessed that side many times before. He gave him a hard time for a few minutes. They blew it off and thought he had been day drinking. They sloped, tilled, mulched, and left a nice flower bed for future use. The next year, last year, I planted some roses in the bed and hired out a company to do a whole yard clean out. They got to that side to pull weeds and lay fresh mulch, and the old man came screaming out of his house telling them to get off his property. He even took a half-assed punch/swipe at one of the guys, calling them all dirty Mexicans. These guys were white, so that made no sense. I came out and he started yelling at me, saying they were messing up his yard and he wanted me to pay to re-sod. I said no way. He called me names over and over again. I told them to ignore that side. I spoke with my wife and we both agreed. If he wants to be a dick, we'll just be petty and let that overgrow so he can look at it. You can't really see it from the street, so I didn't care. Weeds were 4 feet tall by the end of the summer. This spring was wet, so the weeds were knee-high by the start of May. I was outside mowing when he came over the fence, got in my face and asked, "When are you going to clean this up?" I said, "When I have assurances you won't harass me or workers, then I will clean it up." This upset him. He started calling me names over and over again, even threw in the word lazy for good measure. I said, "Call the city," and ignored him. He turned his attention to the other neighbors and started raising holy hell with them. My house, while older, is well maintained and carefully landscaped. His house has aluminum siding from the 80s. He doesn't edge any of the walks or driveway, and he has old aluminum awnings that are filthy. His back patio has tall weeds between the pavers. I say nothing about it, it's not mine, and honestly, he's keeping values down enough that the tax man didn't raise my rates, so I just don't care. The next day, code enforcement knocks on my door. He called. The guy said, "I'm not sure why I'm here. I see no weeds. You have a nice home. Can you show me where he thinks these weeds are?" So we went to the side of the house. Code enforcement see his fence blocking my access. Well, nothing I can do to you, but he has 10 days to remove that fence. He also needs to weed his patio and edge the sidewalk. The next morning, his wife came over and asked if I would split the cost of removing the fence. I said, "Sorry, but we are out of charity money this week." Now there's an old man sweating in the heat removing the fence, and I can hear him calling his kids to come help because their old man couldn't keep his mouth shut. He could at least tolerate someone in his grass to make it look nice, but no. Tomorrow, now that I have access, I'm removing those roses and putting them somewhere I can enjoy them. The mulch will be removed. I'll lay down some landscaping plastic and cover the whole thing in pea gravel. You want to be a pain? Fine, look at the ugly side of my house. Story 2. The university made me write an acknowledgement in my thesis, so I did. A weary me was sitting in front of my laptop, staring at the requirements for submitting the PhD thesis to the university. I had finished the main text to the satisfaction of my 2 supervisors, and I just needed to check the nitty-gritty formatting requirements from the university. Among the items missing was the acknowledgement section. The university even made a big fuss out of it, stating that it was mandatory to thank everyone who has contributed to the success of the thesis. I couldn't help thinking about how bitter the journey was. It started well, I got a scholarship, performed well, and had a great reputation in teaching. But it was a fallout after my supervisor retired due to unforeseen circumstances. Research funds dried out. The school scammed me of 10 grand from equipment purchase because of the errors of the administrative staff. They took away the only space I could use for research, which was just a desk, and left me figuring it out myself. In the end, I could only finish the whole research on my own from the cash I earned from escorting. It was a successful career, but that's another story. And then I needed to thank them to not make myself look like an ungrateful brat. And I came up with an idea. Instead of writing a short note, I dialed my gratefulness to 11. Most other PhD students wrote 2 pages, and I made mine 3 pages long. I thanked almost everyone extensively. My supervisors, my family, my patrons, the student counselor, and even the flight school I attended, and mentioned the details of the support they gave me and what I learned from them. At the very end of the 3-page essay, I dropped a very dry paragraph acknowledging the university, thanking them for the wake-up call for my development into another career and giving me an experience to foster autonomy by doing my own maintenance works and sourcing own fundings. Now, this PhD thesis has passed the final validation, and by university policy, this thesis will be forever publicly available in their library and online repository, and I am pretty sure a few of the juniors are going to have a look as a reference of how to write their acknowledgments, even though they have zero interest in the body text. Story 3. I threw gummy worms at a woman for talking and using her phone in the theater. A few years ago, I was watching Inside Out 2 in theaters. Sitting right in front of me were these 2 women and a young girl, maybe 7 to 8 years old. Throughout the movie, they kept talking, and the 2 women wouldn't stop using their phones. One of the women used hers on full brightness. It was so incredibly disruptive. I happened to have a pack of gummy worms, but didn't want to waste any full worms on her. So, after realizing at some point I couldn't take it anymore, I bit off half of one worm and threw the other half at her and didn't miss. She turned around and looked in my direction, but I just kept looking straight at the screen as if nothing happened. But then she still wouldn't stop using her phone. So a few minutes later, I bit off half of another gummy worm and threw the other half at her. That really got her angry. She turned around, looked right at me and said, "Stop it." Again, I just kept looking at the screen as if it wasn't me who threw it. Then she turned to the woman and little girl and said, "He's throwing gummy worms at me." The 3 of them turned around to look at me, then looked around to see who else could have thrown it. They continued murmuring to each other. Then the little girl pointed at me, at least I think it was me, and said, "Well, it definitely wasn't that guy." The 3 of them turned back around to watch the movie, and the woman finally dimmed her phone and eventually stopped using it several minutes later. They also shut up for the rest of the movie. The woman also left for a few minutes, presumably to tell the staff on me, but nothing came of it. So, for future reference, if you ever see someone talking/using their phone in a movie theater, just throw popcorn or candy at them. They won't know who did it. Story 4. Park in my loading bay. Enjoy getting your car off a stack of pallets. Long, true, and overly detailed. As a teenager, I worked on an island at a grocery store as the store receiver. Technically, I was the night receiver, but I worked 9 to 6 p.m. and was in charge of receiving the most important truck of the day, getting it unloaded, all our garbage and returns and extra pallets, cardboard, etc. loaded, and back out the door in time for it to drive halfway around the island and catch the same ferry it had come on before it left. So time was of the absolute essence. The island is a pretty chill place in the winter, but in the summer it is a rich man's playground, and we often got people parking in our loading bay. So 30 minutes before the truck comes, I always put out 3-foot-tall cones. One day a lady in a red convertible decides to push aside one of the cones and parks directly in our loading bay. I saw her do it and ran out after her, telling her to move. She refused and went into the store anyhow, claiming, "I know Danny, store owner, and he said it was fine." Well, I also knew Danny and knew he didn't say it was fine, but after making repeated announcements and instructing all the cashiers not to let her check out and pay until she moved the car, she came fuming out and moved her car. The next morning, the store owner, Danny, asked me what happened, and I told him exactly what I had done as the truck was on its way. He told me that was fine and he would speak to her. Surprise, surprise, she did in fact know Danny, but he hadn't given her permission to arc in our dock. He did ask me not to tow her car as she was his neighbor, but said since it was a convertible, he didn't see why we couldn't pull her e-brake and push it out of the way, which sure enough is exactly what we did a week later when she again parked in between my cones and then facing the loading bay door, where I was giving her a clear look, flipped me off. I went inside, got a couple other grocery guys, and after releasing the handbrake on her little red convertible, just pushed it straight across the parking lot. It barely gave enough room for our truck to get in, and she was completely blocked in for 30 minutes while I unloaded it. She came into the back of the store as I was unloading trucks, and in order to stop a pallet from hitting her, the loading bay was at a wicked angle. I had to jam my foot under the pallet jack wheels, causing it to jump over my steel toes and land on my foot. I screamed at her to get out of my loading bay, and she was so shocked she actually did. Well, the next afternoon, when I came in to get some things I needed to finish reporting, which I could do from home, As my shift manager had already approved a couple days off to heal my foot, Danny didn't know any of this yet, as he had just arrived and immediately asked to speak to me. I had already been to the hospital and filled out my workers' comp forms about the injury. Fortunately, my foot wasn't broken, but was extremely badly bruised. Danny, actually a really decent boss, said he had a complaint from a customer about me screaming and swearing at a customer and wanted to know my side of the story. I asked if it was the same lady with the red car, and he confirmed it was, which to him confirmed that I had in fact screamed at her. I then asked him if he had seen the security tapes from the dock. There are several cameras. He hadn't, so I told him that until he had watched the tapes, I didn't want to say anything. In front of me, he pulled up the tape. So he saw me on the dock, asking the lady not to park there. He saw her flip me off and leave the car anyhow. A few minutes later, he saw me push her car with the grocery clerks, and then he saw how it was blocked by our truck. Switching to the inside cameras, he saw how she pushed right past the employee-only doors and barged into the loading bay, and how I had used my own foot to stop her from being smashed by the pallet of milk I was whizzing down the loading bay. I literally saved her life with my foot. You couldn't see my foot or what stopped the pallet jack, but by then I had my shoe and sock off, and Danny only took one look at my bruised foot to understand the cause for my rather loud yelling that was being showed on the screen. Funny how Red Car Lady forgot to mention all these things when she was complaining to him. Danny said if she ever parked in the loading bay again to call a tow truck immediately, regardless of the time of day. He knew full well that I could have had a much more serious injury because of this lady, and even after having an entire pallet of milk on my foot, and admittedly screaming at her to get out of the loading bay, I hadn't in fact even swore at her, and if I wanted to, I could have used the injury to get a lot more time off work, costing the business a lot of money instead of the 2 days. I really did need to feel like I could walk again. While the next week came and went, and sure enough, Friday afternoon, who pulls up and parks not in the loading bay, but in front of the dumpster beside the loading bay, still effectively blocking our truck from making the wide turn to get into the bay. Sure, there are no cones there, but I was done. I didn't even say anything to her as she flipped me off again, like she thinks she won somehow. I called a tow truck, but sadly they were on an accident and couldn't come for an hour, so I grabbed the produce guy and a grocery guy, this time unable to push her car as she has put the top onto it and rolled the windows up. I didn't care. I just took the pallet jack and had the produce guy drag out a few pallets. I put a pallet under her car and using the pallet jack lifted and moved her car all the way across the parking lot and then dropped it onto a stack of 2 more pallets. Her tires weren't even on the ground. I just left her like that, and then told the tow truck where her car was when he had time. To her credit, she didn't come into my back end screaming like last time, but the screaming was loud enough that one of the managers called Danny, and he came down to the store and without even talking to me, just backed me and banned her from the store. I guess she wasn't as good a friend as she thought, petty. Yes, rewarding, yes. Danny actually gave me a .10 raise right after that and never told me I did anything wrong, so I guess even he thought she had crossed a line. Story 5. My dad's boss has to pay 3 new people instead of giving my dad the pay that he worked for. For context, I'm a teenager and my younger brother is 11. My family have a good stable life financially, but recently it got better and we're finally able to do things we want now. My dad, 40M, has just gone self-employed because the company he used to work for didn't pay him a good salary for what he actually does. For context, my dad is a floor layer and does little handyman jobs here and there for friends and family. His old boss, we'll call him A, always loved my dad because they started their floor business together. A became the manager and my dad was always the top employee. He did so much for this company that he was going to inherit it when A stepped down. But thing is, every customer who called up usually got my dad because he was happy to go above and beyond to make sure these folks are happy with how the final floor looked. He brought in so much money to this company that he definitely deserved more than he was being paid, practically minimum wage. The injuries he's had while working have ranged from minuscule things like cutting himself to things like cutting his thumb off and electrocuting himself, so you can imagine he's entitled to the raise he eventually asked for. A agreed to give him the raise, but he never did. My dad asked again, same thing. My dad then put up with this until their friendship was basically falling apart because A was always starting arguments over paying my dad. Claimed he didn't have the money to give him a raise and yet has a gorgeous house, 2 nice cars, as well as the work vans for loading carpets and stuff, and his entire family knows very well he does not need to spend all this money on things that don't matter much. They can live in a normal house, sell one of the cars, and be peaceful. But no, A wants to refuse giving a raise to his best employee. So my dad recently put in his 2-week notice. A then started begging my dad not to leave them, to no avail. He offered a pay rise like my dad asked for. My dad declined. He'd been setting this up for a while. My mom and I helped him build his own business from the ground. I work with him on my days off school, and I'm going to be doing it for work experience too. I plan to work with him after I'm out of school too. My dad now gets the pay he deserves and still makes people happy with their floors or anything else he's hired for handyman-wise. I post on a TikTok account to help with advertising, so he's never short of jobs. Right now he's got 3 weeks of work booked ahead. Then had to hire 3 new people and pay them all what he paid my dad, each. So he's paying more than what he would have paid my dad had he just given him the raise. And my dad's doing well for himself. When my dad told me about the new hires, I swear I facepalmed so hard there's probably a dent in my skull. What a fool. Story 6 and the colleague who wishes she was boss. This woman annoys the piss out of me on an average day, but thankfully I don't have to deal with her much. She is not my supervisor, but she completes a lot of the ridiculously little admin tasks that our office requires to take stress off our boss. For example, making sure our training is up to date, submitting time cards, etc. She has her own team as well that she does supervise, but she is not my boss. As my boss is her boss, we have 2 ways we can submit any additional time worked: flex time or tracked time. We all had to work on a Sunday afternoon. Our boss told us we could use either flex or tracked time to make up for it. I chose flex, which really is just I worked this number hours on Sunday, I leave those many hours early on Friday. Tracked means I claim it on my time card for Sunday and claim it on Friday. We're talking 4 hours. Colleague decides that our boss is wrong and that I must follow the instructions she gave to her team to only use track time. No, I don't, is what I told her. She pushes back. I say whatever, rolled my eyes, but planned to just shut her up, as it is usually not worth trying to reason with her brick wall head, but I got busy and didn't go back in to change it immediately. Truly, she is so annoying that I usually just give in so I don't have to talk to her ever. Until my boss calls me into a meeting that afternoon to understand why I am causing her stress. I tell him and ask him to address his role in this. Nicely, of course. We're good. I then send her a message telling her if she has a problem, she can save us all time and just come to me. She replies, I did and you didn't do it. I have to get these things signed. It stresses me out. Oh? Say more. Per policy, our time cards do not have to be submitted until close of business on Wednesday, meaning I have to submit. She doesn't have to sign them until Thursday close of business, but I also learned that she uses the metric of having all the time cards signed by Wednesday to show that she goes above and beyond for the time cards and always beats the suspense. Well, not anymore. I leave at 5. She leaves at 4:30. I submit my time card at 4:55, and it is stressing her out. She has tried to get me in trouble with my boss by telling him I'm late. I just send back the policy on when time cards are due, rinse and repeat. She had a friend reach out this morning to see if I've completed my time card yet. My reply, no, super busy, but I'll get it done before close of business today. Eating my lunch, watching her spin out about being late with the time cards again. Petty, but feels good. Story 7, neighbor who's very artistic by nature getting a sudden eviction because the landlord's daughter wants the house with the art inside. What art? There was a house in our area that was known for having really cool murals inside done by the previous tenant. Outside was pretty tame. She has a pre-built facade to make the house look like a cottage. Inside all hand-done murals of Disney movies and fairy tales. The lady was an art teacher when she was younger, and later she started one of those paint with wine type business, which she did well before fully retiring to just doing paint commissions and furniture decorating. She's always been nice to everyone, even when I've been an ass to her when she complained about the truck being loud or speeding. We worked that out and been friends since. She had an agreement with the original landlord about the art. Since it wasn't outside, it wasn't going to be a problem. She's been living in that house since the mid-80s with promises of getting the house in time. Unfortunately, he passed before anything was signed and legitimized, and his kids took over. One of the sons visited the house to inspect it with his daughter, and apparently they fell in love and wanted the art house for his daughter. My neighbor didn't have a lease, which made the fight harder, and they used the art on the walls as an excuse to kick her out. She was devastated, but she was able to buy a property that fits her needs at the last minute in another state that had a full art studio area on the first floor. She originally wanted to leave the house as is without the cottage-looking front, but my friend offered to restore the house to Rebecca standards for free since he needed to figure out how to use powered paint sprayers. He also had a friend that did landscaping to help her wire the front of the house. She agreed, and we moved all her furniture out to storage units, and my friend let her stay in his guest house free of charge if she did a mural on the living room wall. She had the house cleaned out in a week. On the second week, they buffed all the walls with sanders. All the murals from the front to back were gone. It just looked like blotches of colors. My friend, being the ever-diligent painter that he is, masked anything that wasn't paint and sprayed Kills primer everywhere with his new toy sprayer. This thing was pretty badass. You can spray a whole wall in 4 passes. After the paint dried, he used his Rebecca collection of colors to essentially kill the character of the house. Rebecca condition is what we call flipper houses. It's always the same fucking colors, white with grays all over the house, and the shitty dark tone Pergo flooring. The floors were tile, so he left it alone, but the walls were white semi-gloss. The wood paneling walls, trim, switch covers, outlet covers, counters, and cabinets were sprayed in the most depressing shade of gray. The house looked dead inside when I went in to check it out. It was weird not seeing all the murals. The front of the house was the last project she agreed to give his landscaping friend, the bushes, in exchange for the labor of removing the cottage facade without breaking it. The landscaper basically ripped everything out and just dumped gravel and sand with a boulder for decoration. This weekend I went to fix some problems at an old neighbor's house and noticed the house was still empty and asked the neighbor if had seen anyone move in. He said earlier in the week there was some U-Hauls there, but none of them were unloaded, and that was the last time they remember seeing anyone there. Bet that daughter was in for a surprise when she saw the house get turned into a basic hellhole. Story 8. Boss always found an error with my monthly reports and cover letters, so I used her old ones and watched her rip them apart. I was telling this story the other night, and I was told to post it here. This takes place 19 years ago when I worked for State Street Bank for one of the worst human beings ever, Paula. Real places and names, so I do not care. If you live in Boston and are looking to work at this place, skip it. It is a horrible place to work. Anyway, on to the story. I had just started working for Paula. The team was a mini project team tackling complex financial operation problems with high SVP visibility. That's how it was sold to me. In reality, it was a mushroom farm, with Paula keeping you in the dark and feeding you shit. All I did was compile reports and gather data from people who were terrified of my team. Needless to say, I was bait and switched and was looking to get out shortly after I got there. She had a habit of always criticizing your work to hell with the stupidest things. One, the reports I was responsible for was a weekly update on certain oil warrants out of Nigeria. To those that do not know, a warrant is an agreement to buy a commodity at a specific price, regardless of what the current value is. The reason being there was an option to buy at $30 per barrel when prices peaked at $90 per barrel. We had no idea if the holder knew about this or not, but we had to monitor and report because the liability and loss would have been massive. Anywho, week after week after week after week, Paula would review and rip me a new asshole over the format, verbiage, and every stupid thing not related to the actual numbers being right. Total ticky-tack stuff. One day I was going through the network files and stumbled across an old folder for a similar project. It was Paula's handiwork before they gave her a team to manage. So I decided to use her format for everything, even changing the report structure to look just like hers and using her cover letter language. I brought it to her office to review and sign off, and she absolutely lost her shit. She asked what happened to the old format. I told her since she didn't seem to like what I had been doing, I thought it best to change it around. She said that this was worse than before, probably the worst I submitted to her. She went on and on for what seemed like forever. I just looked at her and didn't interrupt with blank look. Her last question to me was what I was thinking when I made these changes. I told her that I used the formatting and language she used when she was doing a similar report a few years back, that I found the folder online and used her past work verbatim, just with the numbers and relevant information changed. I gave her printouts of her reports and letters to compare. She just looked at me and had this dumbstruck look on her face. I asked if this was bad, should I go back to my format then? She just signed off on the reports and said, to send them as is. I just wanted to confirm that they were fine to send because less than a minute ago she said it was basically unreadable. She said they were fine as is and we didn't have time to redo them. So I sent them out. I was smart enough to find and save all of her old work, for example, to use. I noticed that she thought and deleted/moved the older folders after I encountered because I expected her to. This cat and mouse game went on for remainder of my time there. I would use her templates/past work and wait for her to tear it apart. After a few more times, she eventually figured out I grabbed all of them. She asked, and I told her I created SOPs using all of her past work and had it saved locally. It seemed like a logical thing to do. I was able to quit a few months later.